Hello, welcome everyone to AER Live, a new series of online interactive workshops from Applied Ecology Resources or AER. I am Punnashlok Bhaduri, professor and associate editor of AER's associated journal Ecological Solutions and Evidence. And I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. AER is a globally accessible open platform that makes preserving, sharing, and discovering applied ecological information easier for everyone in the ecological community. We are broadcasting these free online workshops for applied ecologists around the world as we prepare for the launch of our fully searchable database. Today's workshop with Dr. Koustubh Sharma follows on from his team's latest From Practice article in Ecological Solutions and Evidence. From Practice is a unique article type in ESE that allows ecological practitioners to communicate case studies, calls for new approaches or perspectives, and insights from the field in a short, free-form manner. There are other unique article types such as registered reports and data articles that are tailored to encourage more open science, as well as the standard research articles and reviews. So please visit the ESC website to find out more. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Wildlife Acoustics, for this month's AER Live. The relaxing nature soundscape you heard before the start of the workshop was created by today's sponsor, who create the world's leading bioacoustics research tools. More details of their services, including free online training courses, will be provided in a slide at the end of the workshops. I will shortly hand over to our speaker of today, Dr. Koustubh Sharma, who is going to give today's talk. But before I do that, here are a few housekeeping rules I would like to remind everybody. The workshop will be recorded and posted online, so please keep your camera and audio off all the time. Please submit any questions you have for our speaker using the Zoom chat box that you'll find below, and we'll ask some of them during the question and answer session at the end of the talk. So without waiting any longer, let me introduce today's speaker, Dr. Koustubh Sharma, who is joined today by his co-authors, Dr. Justine Shanti Alexander and Mr. Matthias Fiechter, for his talk, What is the Value of Monitoring Evidence, Data, and Science for Nature Conservation Outcomes? Over to you, Koustubh.
Thank you, PB, and good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's truly an honor to be here talking to you all today about this recent publication of ours, and I'm honored to also have my co-authors, two of my co-authors, Dr. Justine, Shanti Alexander, and Mr. Matthias Fiechter, who are here and will talk a little later from now. So without much ado, let me quickly share my screen. And I think we are good to go. Right, I'm assuming you all can see the screen right now. Yes, we have the Spider-Man out there. And yes, I love Marvel movies. Who doesn't? The quote you see over here is surely one famous quote that has been immortalized by Stan Lee's Spider-Man. But believe me or not, this isn't an original Spider-Man quote. It was the French Revolution in the early 18th century when this quote is believed to have been coined. Anyway, the reason I sort of re-invoke this quote here is because of this. Camera traps are a sophisticated tool that have revolutionized wildlife research and monitoring, especially for species such as the snow leopard. For years, we used to call the snow leopard as one of the least studied large cats. And the reason we said so was not because the researchers were any less capable or the species did not generate enough interest among the scientific community. It was because snow leopards would live in a habitat that was virtually impossible for humans to survey effectively and efficiently. Add to it the spectacular camouflage that the snow leopard sports, the species remained inaccessible to much of scientific methods for decades. Now, just to exemplify what I mean by the spectacular camouflage, there is a snow leopard in this image, and you don't need to feel bad for not being able to spot it, because even the ibex here, whose life depends on spotting the snow leopard, is getting it all wrong. That's where the snow leopard is, and you can very well see where the ibex is looking at. Anyway, moving on, from days when a snow leopard was first photographed uh, using pressure pads to now when camera traps provide some of the most incredible insights about not just the abundance, but also animal behavior, movement, species richness, and space use. We have come a long way. It is not surprising that the number of publications using camera traps has increased fourfold in this century from what it used to be before that. Most camera traps we deploy out there uh, are typically they have dual sensors where a simultaneous trigger of motion and heat sensor stimulates a capture. And the high capacity memory cards and batteries have made it easier for the camera traps to record multiple photos or videos every time a camera gets triggered. Obviously, the stealth, coupled with outstanding capacity to capture hundreds of thousands of photos without running out of memory or power, has enthused many researchers to use them for monitoring legal and illegal movements of people. As expected, human images in camera traps have led to legal actions, litigations, and inspired development of general and overarching advisories. While the images can be an evidence for investigation and prosecution, it can catch people off guard and also be considered a breach of people's privacy. And that's why it invokes the question of proportionality versus necessity. Many countries now have laws and legal framework about breach of privacy, freedom of movement, and personal autonomy, which many times we are not even aware of. The other end of the legality lies in that in many situations, the researchers might be bound by law or a permit clause to report illegal activities. Before we discuss this issue further, let's take a short poll. I'm sure you all have seen the automated teller machines. Uh, that's where we get our money. It goes without saying that all ATMs probably bear a warning that the area is under CCTV coverage. And I'd like to ask you here, what, in your opinion, does the message in an automated teller machine about the presence of a security camera communicate? So please take a few seconds over here to choose one of the 5 options that you see in front of you. This just tells us it provides us a spectrum of the kind of opinions that these messages can generate. I'm fascinated by someone who has said that the bank has a lot of money to waste. That's a good one. But otherwise, I think most people here seem to be selecting the option 1, which is it works as a deterrent and protects the equipment, whereas simultaneously, and that's fascinating, it also warns potential offenders about possible repercussions. Moving on. Um, it is well known that several conservation programs across the world are guilty of being coercive and being imposed top down, leading to marginalization and injustices. It is rare to see such close involvement of local communities in the conservation programs as you are seeing in the picture here. The issue of privacy also ties up closely with that of human rights, where the UN Declaration on Human Rights has reinforced in its Article 2 and 9, respectively, stating that all humans are born free and equal, and that nobody shall be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile. Snow leopard conservation programs closely follow partners' principles for community-based conservation. Uh, the, uh, these principles provide a fair bit of a guidance on how to get how to work with the local communities. Now, the extended risks of jeopardizing delicate relationships that we build is not just not unfounded if a technological solution is used inappropriately. It also puts to risk the relationship with the government or other enforcement agencies because they may expect us at times to work with them and share information that could be sensitive. We found during our review that in many countries it's even illegal to remove human images from camera traps, as these are considered automatic recorders, almost as an extension of laws around those around the use of CCTV cameras. So treading the tightrope between ethics and legalities can be difficult, and it leaves gaping holes that not only can be used against unsuspecting local communities, but also researchers. The history of legal battles many conservationists have fought for decades in many parts of the world with the law enforcement authorities as well are a testimony to the possibility. So to come up with a broad framework that protects not just the researchers and or not just the communities but also the researchers, we turn to three key elements. One, the basic human value of liberty and protecting privacy. Two, respect of laws. And three, the partners principles, which I just showed you briefly about. More specifically, we went to three of the principles: respect, transparency, and empathy. Based on these three elements, we listed 7 basic concepts that we hope can provide a useful checklist to visit every time we are planning to camera trap in a new area. And I'll just quickly run you through these 7 principles. The first one, for example, is the simplest to understand, but at times it can be nuanced given uncertain land ownerships, which are sometimes likely given disputes, forced demarcations, or even evictions. Now, since we'll be dealing with that uncertainty a little bit later, we try to simplify this element by limiting permission to the legal authorities who have authority over that land, whether it is government and or local communities. Second one is this is I believe everyone here who has ever worked with camera traps will agree that you often get a few surprises on your camera traps. It is a great research tool and often a design and field study aimed to estimate snow leopard abundance, in our case, has become useful for other purposes, including some side research on species richness or other species distributions and so on. But they can also be valuable for human or livestock movement and sometime prosecution of potential poachers. Now, while the use of cameras should be clearly identified, uh, it, it's really important that the use is kept within the framework of this stated purpose, because and at the same time, you also might want to keep it broad enough to allow for exploring secondary questions. Having said that, any use of human images should only and only be pursued after additional specific approvals. Areas that are likely to be used by local communities. Now, it is important to disclose that the cameras are out there. It is important to make them aware in advance about the upcoming camera trapping work. It is important to maintain transparency by distributing information leaflets, organizing meetings, putting up signages in the area, not necessarily right on top of where the camera is installed, but then showing and also showing pictures that have been produced from the camera trapping exercise whenever they become available. This disclosure goes to the extent of sharing with the local communities the start and end date of camera trapping. And yes, there is a professional hazard of cameras getting stolen by unauthorized or unknown people, and it can go both ways. However, what we believe is building this risk into the proposals themselves should be totally worth the effort. It is also important that we review the laws of the land and legal obligations before venturing into an area, because they can vary considerably between regions. A review may help make an appropriate disclosure. It is also important to keep the other end of the legality, when any attempt to take action against potential illegal activities yourself can also be deemed illegal. Now, let the law enforcement authorities do their job after you hand over the evidence. But of course, remember that it has to be contingent to the permission, purpose, limitation, and disclosure that we just discussed earlier. Privacy, breach of privacy can often lead to targeted harassment, injustice, discrimination, and persecution. Typically, blurring features on a picture that can be used to recognize a photographed person can be used as a standard practice. Today, there are AI-based tools which are available that automatically find human faces and blur them on their own. However, if one is obligated by law to share these images with the law enforcement authorities, appropriate care should be taken to declare such obligations a priori so that we don't catch the local stakeholders off guard. And then I think this is a very crucial point, which we often tend to ignore, but get the local people to participate. It not only builds trust, but it can also generate ideas that can be beneficial to both the researcher as well as the local communities. Lastly, while it is very tempting to claim non-existent features in the cameras with the hope to prevent theft or damage, such practices are breeding the grounds for deteriorating trust and potentially can cause greater damage in the long run, both to the relationship as well as the equipment. Now, it is also a good practice to share images and credits with the relevant authorities or stakeholders that may have given the permission to do this work. Voluntary initiatives to show images, data, or findings to the local communities, it almost essentially helps build trust, and they're more likely to become partners given the enthusiasm of seeing something they may have never ever seen in their own area where they've grown up and lived for years before. So with that, I'd like to stop here by reiterating the golden rule: treat others as you want yourself to be treated. And before I pass on the baton to my colleague Justine, I have one more question for you all, which is based on a true incident, but I'd love to get your inputs and opinions on that as well. Now imagine yourself in a situation where you need to set up cameras in a protected area where the government agency has legal jurisdiction. What they're asking you to do is they're asking you to share all human photos with them as a condition to getting the permit. Now, this is a particular situation and it does happen often. Here, the poll here is a question to you all about what would you possibly do. And as we go forward, Justine and my colleague Matt, they'll be talking a little more about this. Okay, we have a few, wow, we have 100% almost responses, which say that people will agree, but will ensure that local stakeholders are informed about the cameras and how the images of people will be used. Absolutely heartwarming to see this consistent response from all our wonderful participants here. Absolutely, I think that's one of the best ways to go about it. And yes, in some cases, well, you might want to refuse to conduct your study in a protected area. Fair enough, but we also need to understand that in some cases, protected areas may need certain work to be done within them as well. But yeah, thank you very much. I'll end the polling here and I'll just share the results with you all before I pass it on to Dr. Justine Shanti Alexander. And as you can see, 95% of the respondents have mentioned that they will agree to the condition, but will ensure that local stakeholders are informed about the cameras, and also they are informed how the images of people will be used. With that, I'll stop here and over to you, Justine.
Thank you, Koustubh, for introducing the publication and the principles underlying the code of conduct that we put together. So with all frameworks, like this, it's always helpful to explore examples and to see how these principles actually play out, because it's easier said than done in many cases, I think we believe. So we wanted to share with you a few examples from the range, from our experiences in the snow leopard range. So our teams and partners have been using camera traps for over 15 years now, focusing on research and conservation of this beautiful, elusive big cat in Asia, but also considering other species and conservation approaches. And this experience has really helped us shape the code of conduct. So next page, next slide, Koustubh. So I'm going to share 3 situations from our work and how we worked through these challenges and these principles. So Koustubh, can you share next? And these all will underline the importance of community involvement and participation. And in that respect, we're going to highlight our conservation approach at the Snow Leopard Trust, the kind of approach we're trying to advocate. So next. So our work in the South Gobi in Mongolia started actually in 2006, and our teams began camera trapping over snow leopard habitat over 1,500 kilometers squared, so a huge landscape that was also shared by herding communities. And these herders were grazing their goats and their sheep in the area, and their livestock was occasionally preyed on by snow leopards or wolves. Next. Herders used to report the sound of gunshots in the area. So we knew that there was illegal activity. And eventually this illegal activity was caught on camera trap. And it was probably involving the hunting of ibex, argali, which was the main snow leopard prey there, but also potentially wolves and even snow leopards themselves, which is illegal in Mongolia. So my question now to you, our question, and if Koustubh, you can put the poll again, is what would you do if your team started camera trapping in this area and it was the beginning of your effort and you did detect some illegal activity? I recognize that will depend on your context, but maybe think about your area, your context. Would you share these images with the local authorities straight away? Would you ignore and delete the human images, share and discuss the images with local communities? Would you try to find individuals caught on camera and maybe go and tell them off, or maybe say, oh, don't do it again, and try to work with them individually? Or it would really depend on this disclosure with the local stakeholder prior to the survey. And of course, that's the case. Or maybe there's even another option. You would put it on social media straight away and say, oh my God, these people need to be caught as soon as possible, which I have seen on Twitter on a few occasions. Okay, so we'll end the poll. And as you can see, it's a mixed results. So some of you, around 50%, said you would share your images with the local authorities. Others said that you'd share and discuss the images with local communities. And others said it depended on the disclosure, around 66%. So in our case, I mean, thank you for these reactions, because we understand there's no blanket answer in all situations, and there are a lot of parameters to consider, such as what is the severity of the punishment if the person was caught, how widespread is the practice of hunting, the legal status of the researchers, or maybe the prior relationship with the community or the authorities in the area. So what did our team actually do? Well, they did report the photos to the local authorities, and the local authorities is the SUM inspectors in the area. And this actually raised a lot of concern with the community in the area, and they became a bit wary of the research and the conservation effort that was going on, and potentially even lost a bit of trust for our conservation work. So the team took action, and they tried to build more trust and confidence through a range of different measures. They've created further dialogue, outlining and communicating the purpose of our camera track work in the area with the authorities, but also the community members and the local government. And they were explaining that it was really about studying snow leopard ecology. There were also steps that were taken to explain to the community that they had the legal obligation to share these images, especially in the area that later became a nature reserve. And a contract was actually made with with the community. So to say what we were going to do with the images or our work, and also the community also invited to say what they were going to do. So it became very clear on everyone's responsibilities. Next. The team also focused on strengthening the participation of the community in the research. So if we fast forward to this year, 2021, it is the herders themselves who set up and serve as the active leaders in the local research, setting up the cameras, collecting them, and all the monitoring efforts. So this example tries to reflect a little bit on the principles of legality, disclosure, and purpose limitation. So if I'll quickly move on to another example next, from India, from Spiti Valley of the Himalayas of India. Oh, here's another example of Fuji with the herder community, herder rangers, we call community rangers. Next, Koustubh. Next slide. Oh, it's coming. So this is a snow leopard in Spiti in India, and our teams there continue to cover even larger areas with camera trap surveys, because we're trying to really understand how many snow leopards there are across the range, because you've probably heard that it's continues to be a guesstimate how many snow leopards there are. So we're really working with teams on the ground to understand this more, and that means more camera trap effort over larger areas. And in this one particular case, camera traps were placed annually in a nearby community to Khyber, which is in Spiti. And over several years, some of the cameras, the memory cards, the batteries, they would go missing, they would go stolen, get stolen. And then there were other incidences where the team would find the camera traps completely broken, completely damaged. And there may have been several reasons for this theft, for this damage being taking place. But our team thought that perhaps it was because they were not actively working in this community. They were more just doing the research on the side, trying to survey larger areas. So the team had already consulted with the community initially, but they hadn't really followed up over the years to come. And this was perhaps leading to more theft and damage of the camera traps. So I wanted to put another poll out there. In such a circumstance, what advice would you give to your team? So if Koustubh, you can put the poll, thank you. Would you share the outputs of the camera traps and explain the purpose to the surrounding community? So we're assuming that we think the community themselves are creating the damage. Or would you respect the community's concern and call for a meeting to discuss the way forward? Maybe you want to spread the rumors of the camera's ability to identify individual people. So that might discourage theft in the future, which I've heard it does get done on the ground in some cases. Or do you want to work on building trust with the community by maybe starting other conservation programs or other research in the area? Or maybe just complain to the local authorities because they've got to do something about it and stop this. So thank you everyone for bringing in your votes. So just to share the results, I see again, we're broadly thinking 3 approaches, sharing the outputs of the camera traps and explaining the purpose. Yeah, just as like the Mongolia team did. And maybe also respecting the community's concern and calling for a meeting. 78% said that. And then finally, building trust and spending time. So thank you, everyone. I think we're all on the similar page. So next, Koustubh. So what the team did do, as many of you answered, is they tried to increase dialogue with the community so that the camera traps respected the community's privacy. So in 2013, they decided to further build consensus before setting up their cameras again that year. And they spoke with the village leader, the coordinator of that village. And he quickly suggested, don't just speak to me, you've got to speak to the whole entire community and bring them together. So he brought everyone to gather together and to discuss. And during these discussions, it became apparent that some members of the community were really uncomfortable with the presence of cameras in the pastures. They explained that they felt really under surveillance of potentially being using natural resources in the area. And in one case, even one person described how they felt that even their household, inside their household, was being watched because there was a camera trap in the pasture. So the team really tried to work with the community members and move them out of common used paths that were being used, and underline that their presence was not related to documenting illegal activity, but understanding the science of the species. They also took time to show the process of camera trapping and how it worked. And the team actually continues to do that and discuss their research. And every year now, they try to increase this dialogue and show the outputs with different members, with the women, for example, here, or next, Koustubh, or and the men, because they mentioned that they wouldn't be surprised if some of the cameras again go missing, because it's a continual process and of building trust with that community. So now the cameras don't seem to be going missing, but let's see what happens in the future. So this was another example of the principles of privacy and trying as much as possible to share results. So I'll just share one final example of our code of conduct. And our code of conduct for camera trap researchers is not in place just to address major challenges, as Koustubh outlined. It's also for advocating for research approaches that share benefits across different actors, especially community actors who are often on the front line, but are often neglected from the research process. So this is a picture from Sangzhuanyuan, Qinghai province in China. And the team has set up a system where they engage the majority of the households in the camera trapping effort. And they refer to it as the citizen science camera trapping effort of Angsai village or Sangzhuanyuan area. So each household manages one camera trap that is located in their pasture. And in this way, the camera traps are able to cover over thousands of kilometers squared, which wouldn't be really feasible on an annual rate if they were to do it alone. And it really has built the strong engagement of the community, not only in the research, but in the local conservation work on the ground. So this is another example of the principle of participation that Koustubh mentioned. So one last slide, next, Koustubh. These are just 3 examples of how our camera trapping effort has been adapted to the local situations. They involved all dialogue with the communities, and this dialogue was really rooted in empathy, which was one of the partners' principles that Koustubh mentioned, and in the effort of understanding. It didn't represent this like one-way communication with different stakeholders. In all of these cases, issues and challenges continue to be faced, and our teams are always trying to be attentive and trying to address them early on. But as explained in the paper, this camera trade code of conduct also reflects our conservation approach. It's about the principles of justice, equity, and also building strong partnership with stakeholders. But we do recognize that it's not as simple as it may seem on the ground, and it might not be, and it may be applied differently in different settings. So some conservationists may face real big challenges related to extreme poverty, violence, corruption, even war. So we really welcome reflections and examples from other settings, so we can really make sure that this code of conduct is more relevant and useful to more conservationists or researchers on the ground. Yeah, and that's all from me, just giving those 3 examples. So I think Matt is going to take it from here about how to communicate some of these photos and findings.
Thanks very much, Justine, and of course Koustubh as well for everything you've presented. I don't want to take too much time since we've already spent quite a bit of time on this, but I do want to share a few thoughts and raise a few points from a communicator's perspective rather than a researcher's perspective, which Koustubh and Justine have covered. Many of you might have comms teams you work with in your institutions, or you engage in scientific comms yourself. And of course, camera trap images are a valuable tool for that as well. And there are a few important things to have in mind that are relevant, I think, for this group when it comes to using these images. The first one is how to use or not use camera trap images of animals. What do we share? What do we not share? And then the second one, which is arguably the more complex question, is What about images of people? What about the sort of bycatch that can raise ethical issues? Next slide, please, Koustubh. This one you may have seen and may remember, case from a couple of years back when PETA, the animal rights organization, sued a photographer on behalf of this crested macaque that's smiling at us here. This is not a camera trap image, but the issue could arise with a camera trap image as well. Hopefully it won't, because this was shot down, rightfully so, I believe, because it's somewhat absurd. But of course, questions around rights and what you should do with camera trap images may arise. Next slide, please, Koustubh. More important, when I was doing communications for Snow Leopard Trust, I found myself faced with a dilemma sometimes, because you want people to care about these species, and nothing is more powerful than photos of the species in their habitat to do so. But then when we had conversations with the research team, there were certain concerns that arose, as well as with donors and other people out there. For instance, what if poachers see these photos and they use them to locate snow leopards? Or what if tourists come in large numbers to a particular location because of the amount of snow leopard pictures that we are sharing? Now, for snow leopards, the risk of that, I think we've sort of elaborated, is not too high because they have huge home ranges, they're very elusive, they might be in a location once and then never again. So the chances of actually giving away something that could be problematic are very, very small. But of course, for other species that some of you may be working on, that doesn't necessarily apply. So it's something to have in mind when these images are shared publicly. What we did were just a few couple of simple rules to have in mind. One is we always cropped out the metadata that camera trap images usually have. So the date, time of day, and all of those other numbers that are usually in the frame. This just to kind of minimize the information that we're sharing. And the second more important thing is we never shared the exact location of where a camera was set up when we communicated publicly about it. Both, again, to just make sure that we don't inadvertently give the wrong people the wrong kind of information. One thing we didn't discuss, but that I think might be worth considering, is whether you want to share multiple images of animals in the same location repeatedly, watering holes or other places where they go to leave signs and things like that. Because if you do have a location where clearly these animals come very frequently, that might, in fact, give away information that could be valuable to the wrong kinds of people. We were also asked a few times by media to, for instance, place a camera trap inside a snow leopard den or put a camera on a collar. And none of these requests ever came to anything, but they do, of course, raise a lot of challenging ethical questions that I think might be worth having a think about. Next slide, please, Koustubh. And then finally, this is an example from our own work, and it touches on a more thorny issue, which is how to communicate publicly when you do find images of people on your camera, especially if they're breaking the law or doing something they shouldn't be doing. This one is a story we published, well, I wrote and published in 2017, which basically tells the story of, it could have been another example of Justine's. Similar thing happened in Kyrgyzstan in one of our partner communities, where a camera trap captured images of a party of suspected poachers who were riding into the protected area. This was outside of the protected area borders, but it's in a valley that leads nowhere else. So they're clearly going into the protected area. And they were guided by a man from the local partner community, with whom we had an agreement, a conservation agreement, as part of which they had pledged not to provide any kind of services to outsiders, for instance, guiding poachers. So we decided to write about this because we felt it was important to share. But it does, of course, raise some questions. And what we did back then was, we thought, first of all, the case, when we published it, was already a couple of years old. The incident happened, I believe, in 2015 or 16, and this was published in 2017. And so the matter had already been resolved and settled with the community, and there was no further follow-up. In this case, there were also no legal consequences or proceedings, because technically the people in this image aren't breaking the law. They're outside the protected area, so they're it's clear where they're going, and from a conservation perspective, it's problematic. But legally speaking, there was no obligation to initiate any kinds of proceedings. What we did share, though, was that the local community had broken their agreement, and as a consequence had lost conservation bonuses that were part of the deal there. Now, when I look back, I think we should have done a better job in this particular blog article, and I'll share a link later so you can have a look. I think it was fine to share this, but what we should have done better is contextualize what's going on here, because obviously a community member guiding a group of poachers into a protected area isn't a black and white story, even though it may appear to be. There's economic incentives, there's marginalization. There may have been other things that the person may have been coerced for all we know. At least, at the beginning, you just do not know. And when we communicate about such things, if we're not aware of these things, I think we risk perpetuating a certain image of local communities being a threat to wildlife. And that's problematic both for our work and I think both as well in a larger context in terms of just how you frame conservation issues. And so I don't have definitive answers to this, but I wanted to just share this example for people to think about and ask questions if you would like. And I think with this, we are at the end of the presentation part.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Koustubh, Justine, and Matthias. I think we are getting a lot of interesting set of questions, but as usual, time is always short, so we have to restrict the question and answer session. So without any more delay, I'll quickly go to some of these questions. So, for example, Sakib has asked, in which part of India do you find the snow leopard?
Thank you. So Sakib, snow leopards are found across the Himalayan range in India. When it was a single state, it used to be the Jammu and Kashmir state. Now it's 2 union territories, if I'm not mistaken, where the snow leopard is there. Then Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Sikkim, and Arunachal Pradesh. So across the northern belt, if you can visualize it, that's where the snow leopards are found in India.
Okay, great. There's a very interesting question. Do you pay local community members for their involvement in deploying and maintaining the camera traps?
So let me put it this way. If you're taking someone's service as a field assistant or as a guide, then by all means, we must and we do pay them. If there is someone who is just advising or assisting out of interest and not really working with us, that's a different issue. But yes, if we are taking the services of local people to help set up camera traps, I think that's where we do pay. Justine, if you have anything to add to that, please.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I just wanted to add in China now, the local government has incorporated the camera trap work in their local policies. So they now pay the herders to conduct the camera trap work.
Okay, so Joanna has asked, what if by letting the locals know about the camera traps and monitoring project, we also inform poachers where to look for the protected animals?
So yeah, that again, a very good question. To be honest, we never try to reveal the exact locations, and I think Matt has tried to clarify that as well. That even when we are informing the locals, we're not putting bright colored markers saying that here is a camera or there where you have a camera. That kind of enhances the risk of vandalism and damage or theft. But definitely, if you are setting up cameras in an area, it's a broader messaging that this area has camera traps. So we don't try to inform exactly where the cameras are, but a broader information about where generally the cameras are. I think that still works. And the bottom line is also that people usually know if an area has snow leopards or not. So there's nothing new that we are telling them by setting up cameras. If there are, yes, if we tell them where exactly we are setting up the camera and that's where we're getting a picture, I think that's when you're enhancing the risk. But other than that, that's I think it's fair game.
Yep. Team has asked. Oh, sorry, you're saying something. Yeah.
Sorry, can I just add? I just
Of
Yeah.
think
course.
also, in the end, it's the communities are there in the long term. So we have to see them as partners, and I think working with them is the only way through that, and not consider necessarily them as poaching risks all the time. So that's what we try to do as well.
Okay, great. So team has asked, would you also crop an image to remove a characteristic landmark to prevent the area being easily identified?
Sometimes, yes.
There's one more question which I thought was very interesting. I mean, this is a question that is coming from most of the audiences. Do you know of any instances where bias in data collection occurred because herders were aware where camera traps were put in?
I'm sorry, I couldn't get the question. So bias in the sampling because of where the camera traps are being put?
Yeah, because
For,
the herders were aware about it. Yeah, sorry.
yeah, well, I mean, our primary goal on most occasions is to camera trap for wildlife. As we started with, human images are mostly bycatch, and but I'm not quite sure if herders knowing where the cameras are would potentially lead to bias. Justine, unless I'm misunderstanding something.
No, no, I agree with you, Koustubh. I mean, the only thing we have seen in Sandra and Nguyen, for example, is enthusiasm in the beginning. So going to the best snow leopard spot with lots of signs, and then later going next door to a pasture where snow leopards aren't going to go. So then data quality kind of went down, but that involved continual working with that. But yeah, so it could lead to less quality data. But I think in general, no, in Mongolia, the herders set up the cameras in the best spots because they actually know better where snow leopards are
Then
going to
us.
go than external researchers. Yeah.
Great. I think a lot more questions are coming in, but as again, time is always short. So I think this brings this month's AER live workshop to a close. Thanks once again to Koustubh, Justine, and Matthias, and to everyone who have joined our talk today. If you have any questions that we didn't have time to go through during the workshop, you can always ask the speakers on Twitter. Please use the hashtag AER Live and tag us in your tweet. The speakers' details will also be provided in a tweet on the AER Twitter account. So I think the next month's workshop will be also led by Dr. Patty Bayo, who is the head of the US operations for island conservation, an international organization preventing extinction on island and expanding boundaries of island conservation efforts worldwide. So you can get to know more details about that in the due course of time, and you can always register, of course, and the link has been provided. Uh, Ecology Live is the British Ecological Society's weekly series of talks on the latest ecological research, and is now underway. The talks are broadcast every Thursday at 3 p.m. UK time until the 20th May. Please visit the BES website to register for upcoming talks and catch up on any talks you have missed on the BES YouTube channel. Uh, Finally, I leave you with details of today's AER Live sponsor, Wildlife Acoustics, as well as creating cutting-edge recorders and software for monitoring and analyzing environmental sounds. Wildlife Acoustics offer a range of free online training courses, video tutorials, and much more. You can get to know more about Wildlife Acoustics by visiting their website www.wildlifeacoustics.com/resources. Thanks again to everyone for joining us today, and hope to see you all next month.